been told before, and although I didn't believe it, but I do now, that if the professor can't pronounce your name, he won't call on you. And I haven't been called on. So I'm not sure if that's, I mean, I sit in the front row, so I would be an easy target. You know, right here, let's call on her. But they can't pronounce my name, and they don't speak to me as if I have a name.
Several of my professors would get me confused with another, probably only the other black male student in the class. You know, still it was, you know, it was enough. Being confused with him, you know, even though physically we looked different, was enough to turn me off to anything that they would say after that.
Well, it's kind of hard when the faculty member doesn't even speak to you in the hallway and kind of puts his eyes down and looks the other way as he sees you coming. And then when you speak to other students about their experience with the professor, it's been very friendly and very open and very inviting, and it kind of builds up hostility.
There's no reason why, nor can I find any reason to justify why first year should resort to some kind of hazing, that, you know, this ritual of, you know, scaring students.
He kept digging and digging and digging, and this by far is one of my worst experiences in school, because before that, prior to this, to being called on, I did raise my hand a couple of times to try to contribute to a class, but after, I was basically pummeled from this professor. After that, I didn't raise my hand anymore, because I felt like anything I could have said, he could have just tried to make me feel dumb.
I was struggling through reciting the case, and the professor finally just sort of walked away from the podium and heaved this huge sigh and said, "Obviously, we need to move on." I thought I was long ago over being humiliated, or that I was too old or too sophisticated because I'd been out in the work world as a professional for so many years, and that I wanted to run out of that room and dig a hole for myself. And I must tell you, ever after, every time I had to walk into that room, it was hell. And every day I tried to be as small as I could be in that seat.
It was a little disheartening to hear the professor ask me how many years have I been in the U.S., whereas that question would not have been asked by anyone else, to anyone else. And the worst part was when I was told, I wrote very well for the number of years I've been here, which leads me to believe that there are certain assumptions that professors make about students when they teach a class.
I'm dyslexic, and seeking accommodations is basically a need that I've had to explain to people for a long time. People never could figure out why it was that a PhD or a JD, for that matter, who's in the teaching environment never knew anything about this kind of a thing, when so many people actually have learning disabilities.
There were times in some of my professors' classes that I'd raise my hand to make a contribution to the discussion of the material, and it was my impression that the professor, before I ever opened my mouth, had discounted really what I was going to say, and exactly what that was related to, I'm not sure. But if you can imagine raising your hand and knowing before the words ever come out of your mouth that the professor is looking to go on to the next hand, you just never have the same positive feelings about that course afterwards.
There's a lot of areas of study that are presumed, and you know, you students must know already about economics and finance, and therefore let's just hit the ground running and deal with these cases. And I can remember being in the hot seat in the middle of trying to assess this case that had to deal with really a lot of issues about econ and finance, and I shut down. It was very scary.
Professors would say, well, of course, many of you know Latin, but you'll have to unlearn your Latin to relearn the Latin terms the way they're taught in law school. And I'm sitting there saying, but I never studied Latin.
And my teacher made a joke. I think it was concerning the Hope Diamond, is what is commonly referred as. I never heard of it before. It's never come up in my family, my friends. We never talked about the Hope Diamond at all. So I'm sitting there talking to my friend, ask my friend, what's the Hope Diamond? She tells me, I don't know. And I said, I don't know. You know, so we're both sitting there confused. Everyone's laughing. They're talking about some Hope Diamond I never heard of. How does this come back to what we've been taught, what we've been learning during this section? And so the whole rest of the class, we're trying to figure out what's the Hope Diamond. We're passing notes down the line, you know, what's the Hope Diamond? You know, just trying to figure it out, because now we're like 2 minutes behind everyone else.
I was in the class where the professor was talking about our ancestors, our ancestors. If it wasn't ignorance, it was lack of, you know, being in touch with your students. He wasn't thinking about the students he had. Because after that comment, I was thinking the whole time, they're not my ancestors.
One of the experiences we talked about shutting down, one of the experiences that occurred to me was when one of the profs used an example that relayed to the greasers, and that was a very, very uncomfortable thing for me to have to listen to.
When comments like that are made, the class focus is on you. You know, generally that group of people that he or she is talking about is represented by 1 or 2 people in the class, and it's up to you to deal with, you know, how am I going to look in this instance? You know, how am I going to react now? You know, am I going to do something in the future? And there's enough stress in law school. There's enough things to deal with in law school just trying to get through where you shouldn't have to deal with those types of issues.
There's a great opportunity available to everybody in legal academia. It is available to you to do a great deal of what everyone else has said, to understand that when you talk about unconscionability, you're not talking about an amorphous victim. For the most part, you're talking about poor people, okay? And there are a lot of poor white people, but there are a hell of a lot of poor black and Hispanic and Asian and so on and so forth people. And that leaves a lot of opportunity for discussion. You can go there or you can not go there. When you talk about rent control, you can go there or you can not go there. I've had professors who very explicitly have told me in class, I'm not going there. And I think that leads to some of the feelings of resentment and rejection that a lot of people have really described here.
Because I'm such a verbal person, and sometimes when you read cases, and those really highly charged racial cases that we read about, that professors won't even discuss. They won't even assign to read them, and if they do assign those cases to read, we don't discuss them. And those are some of the real issues that that have affected African American lives and a lot of minority lives that aren't even being discussed, or issues not even being raised or analyzed to figure out what happened or why they happened. And I'm sitting in class, and first of all, you're alienated. You have all these white people sitting around you, and you may be one of 70 people. And you're sitting there and you want to say how you really feel, and you can feel the steam just blowing out your ears.
I definitely have one experience that struck me just this last semester as a third year, in which I found myself thinking that not only was I not learning, but I felt absolutely silenced in the classroom. When race came up, a lot of people had a lot of things to say, which is, very understandable. However, the only people who were called on by the professors were white males, but I'm not saying, that it was entirely one-sided. It was very much a heated debate. However, it was taking place between white males and white males with a white male professor. And, I raised my hand, and I kept it up for close to 40 minutes, and I was never called on. Halfway through the class, I find myself absolutely seething inside, and I wasn't listening to the conversation. I wasn't even thinking anymore about the arguments I wanted to make. All I could think about was, why had I not been called on, and why was this conversation taking place between this cast of characters when so much more could have been added to the discourse via the experience of others in the class, be it women, be it people of color. It didn't matter.
She would have her 2 or 3 favorite golden boys, basically, is what I called them. It gets a little discouraging, I think, when professors do find their few people and just stick with that the whole entire semester, because then you don't have as much incentive to, be prepared or work or whatever.
In a big way, it made me question why I'm in law school, or alternatively, what's wrong with the system. Because if the system wants to include more people of color and people of diverse background, it has to include what we bring to the institution. It has to include our perspectives, our takes on certain issues, our culture. Just it needs to open the door to let this expand.
The big thing about first year is the overall word that I could describe was mystery. I mean, everything was mysterious, you know. What is that? What is that? What is outlining? I've never heard of that. I've never done that before. When should you start doing it? You know, the second week, the 13th week? What is it? What should be in it?
I think that the teachers have been teaching the material so long that they almost take for granted the basic premise of what they're trying to teach. And if we can't get the basics, then we can't come to the level that you are as a teacher. And sometimes sometimes I think teachers need to just slow down just a little and let the class get to where you are, so that we can learn better.
Remember relating it to an attorney friend of mine saying, well, they've given me a bunch of boards and a hammer and some nails, and I'm supposed to build a widget, but I don't know what a widget is or what it looks like, and I can't.
Being taught specific subjects that in real life are not isolated. It's so hard for me to learn individual things without having a big picture.
One of my criticisms about the whole law school environment is that it's very alienating. They completely take people and people's experiences out of the law. So all you're learning are these abstract rules.
When I'm in a class and I see a practical side to it, or I can relate to it, I learn much better. When it's something, oh, this happens in my family life, or there's situations outside of law school that I can apply what I'm learning to, and I learn much better. My situation was that I hadn't been around lawyers before I came to law school. My parents and I have a close family. We're in the gas and grocery business. You don't talk to lawyers. You don't say, how's it out there in the real world of law? You know, what's the price of gas today? So when I came to law school, I'm learning all the theory and the substance. And I came because I wanted to learn that. I've chosen to learn what you're about to teach me, that is the law. But I have goals too. I want to use it. An example of a class where I actually could relate it and some practical information came out of, applications came out of the class, was immigration law. I have a family of first-generation immigrants. That's my family. And every single thing I learned in that class, there wasn't either a friend of the family or an uncle or a cousin or somebody who this information could help them.
I think my best experiences in the classroom have been when professors actually gave you concrete examples of what is used in the real world. Things that we can put our hands on and say, okay, I understand what I'm doing now. I understand what we just spent the last month doing, rather than talking about life estates when I don't even know anybody who ever has a will. I've never seen that. So when somebody can bring in an actual will, for example, and it says the A for life or whatever, that makes a lot more sense.
We each had to do individual research, so original research, and so I went out and I interviewed women who were on AFDC about the recent welfare law and the changes in that, and I wrote a paper about that, and that was a great experience.
In my property class, we had an assignment. We were supposed to go out into the real world with a camera and take pictures of easements. Go find 5 easements, take a photograph of it, make slides, develop it into slides, come back. We had a slideshow, and we had to describe, you know, where we found this and what this was and why we think it's an easement. And it makes perfect sense because, duh, property, it's out there in the real world.
When it came to teaching the course, he was the most focused, most organized person I'd ever met in my life. And that's what I wanted.
A professor sitting up front and saying, at the end of the semester, I would like for this student to be able to answer this question, this question, this question, this question, then backing off, structuring the syllabus to cover the information required to answer those questions. And now we've got to focus. Now the professor knows where he's headed. The syllabus coincides with what's important for that student to learn. The student's attention is focused on these specific things so that he can give some depth to it, some understanding to it. Now we're learning.
The syllabus that I'm talking about, he took the time to put questions within each case so that while you're reading it, not only do you look for the answer to that question, but when you find it, you start putting the pieces together. I find myself completely following him in class. He reviews it. You know which way he's going to go. The best thing about the knowing the questions and everything is that no matter how difficult the subject is, you can prepare for the class. You're not just reading the case and briefing a case to show up in class. You know what to expect.
I have an experience this semester in my civil procedures course that I think is really helping me digest the course a lot better, and the teacher calls it calisthenics, and they actually go back about 2 or 3 cases each day and behind the case that we're supposed to begin with, and kind of build a bridge leading into the case that we're discussing, kind of set it up to draw out the issues and have you thinking that night about the issues that will come up in the cases the next day. And then when you come to class the following day, you step back again and do the calisthenics, and slowly you begin to get a lot better view of what the forest is, rather than just getting stuck on the individual cases.
I like that we always start out with free writing, which I think is a really great way to just get your mind loose and just start thinking about the issues in a very brainstorming kind of fashion. And we ended it that way, which I also thought was very good to tie up what it was that you learned during that 45 minutes, and what maybe you didn't learn and what you hope to continue to work on.
The use of the email system was also a very good thing during this past semester. If you're home and you think of a question, I could just type in my question, get either an immediate answer, or my criminal law professor, he would always address email questions first thing.
He gave us an assignment midway of just 5 short questions, and he had us prepare them. And it wasn't graded, it was just simply check, plus, just to see how we were doing. And it was perfect because some of us went to see him afterwards, and we realized what we were doing wrong, and it was a good method for him to gauge whether we were getting the material. And it helped. It eased me a little because it gave me an idea of, oh, this is what he's looking for. Oh, I'm reading too much into the fact pattern.
I think I did better in the classes where the professor gave mock exams, and then an hour later came back into the classroom and went through, step by step with the whole class.
She gave us a sort of policy-related question. I think it was called the Dog's Breakfast, where we would have to turn in a written sort of opinion as to what a particular quote within contract law meant. She gave that back to us with a lot of feedback. On top of that, she made copies of model answers that she thought were good, and she handed them out to all of us.
I like the problems-oriented classes is because some people think differently, and when a professor gives you a problem that you're going to work on it and use a hands-on approach, it gives you the opportunity to use what works for you. Some people, they can just go through the steps and everything just kind of falls in line. Other people, they have to mull it over, they have to think about it, and then they put it together. And at the same time, you're using that information right now, you're using it during the semester, and you're applying it.
If throughout the semester, whether it might be little hypotheticals or little written questions you're asked to prepare for the next day, as long as you're taking what you've heard and trying to use it, it is much more effective.
What it does is getting a fact pattern to analyze forces a student to make concrete what is abstract.
And there was one class, it was a domestic violence class, where I had an excellent experience because the professor, I mean, not only did she make us do like mock interviews, you're going to interview a client who's going to be like this. She's going to have this background, she's going to be like this, and we had to think about ways, we had to strategize about ways how you could approach the woman to get the information that you needed from her, but also learning how to empathize with her, learning how to interact with her.
One really good experience I had in the class where we were studying labor law, and the professor wanted us to talk about the labor statute. And what she did is she divided the class, about 40 people, into groups of 4, and everybody was going to pretend that they were making recommendations to a congressional committee about how to change the statute. So we had to sit down, we had to read the statute the night before, we sat in our group, and one group would be representing the Workers' Association, one group might be representing the Manufacturers Association, so forth, different organizations, and you had to argue with other people in your group how the statute should be changed. You had to redraft it. You had to come up with a presentation to make to Congress, and then one person from that group had to make the presentation. Now you think about what you did in that thing. You had to read, you had to interpret a statute, you had to present and persuade to other people in your group, argue effectively, and then you had to stand up and make a presentation, and you had to write a statute. Those are 5 incredible skills that you need to have as a lawyer that you had to practice in 1 hour. It was fabulous.
We had a case, and we had to do interviews. And the professor actually portrayed the plaintiff and dressed the part and the whole bit.
Every week we'd have, say for instance, I was in a firm with 4 people. 2 people would be attorneys, one would be one of our witnesses, and the other would be a reporter or something like that. Definitely, when I took that class, brought back my enthusiasm for wanting to go out and practice. It made me remember, okay, this is why I'm here. This is what I want to do.
She assigned groups of about 6 or 7 students to each research particular area, and then we had to present that to the rest of the class. And she didn't want you to get up there and be a law professor. She wanted you to do a skit or to do, and we had some really creative, when you talk about creativity, we had some people that did some really funny stuff, people laughing, rolling in the aisles, the whole thing, and you remember what you did when you do that.
I think having different students teach helps gather our attention, because the students, by being a student, we know what would really affect us, what would best capture our attention, and so you get diverse presentations, or you get, handouts, flyers, use of overhead, and use of multimedia visuals.
This guy that set up a shotgun in his house, and when someone entered, and our professor brought a picture of this guy and pasted it on the wall next to the door, so people would know, well, this is what happened, this is what this guy looks like, this is what the house looks like. And yeah, it was interesting. And I mean, it's a continuation of this visual effects, bringing it, making it livelier for the students, because now it's not only words in a textbook, now you have the pictures, you have a little history of what happened.
My contracts instructor occasionally we did a lot of UCC stuff, hand out a flow chart. Here's how you would go through the analysis of a buyer's remedy or a seller's remedy. And the whole class would go, oh.
But what was important, and I don't think this was treating anyone as a baby, but he put the rules on the board in the beginning of the class. And that was important because there's so many rules, and they're on the board at the beginning of the class. You can say, okay, this is what we're dealing with today. And everything that I'm listening to, I'm tuning in for this issue today. And that works well with a method of calling on students, and that rule is on the board so that you can refer to at any point during the discussion.
It's really positive to me when professors actually do take an interest in who you are and your culture. If they don't know anything, and they admit that, that's human.
An effective method is if the professor keeps an open door policy and really tries to get to know his or her students, then in the classroom I think that facilitates better interaction, because a professor may be able to draw out students because they know something about them.
I know one teacher said when she got our assignments, wow, there's some of you that are so intelligent and provide better answers than were ever expressed in class, but you never talk. Why don't you talk? And a lot of people handed in answers to her why they didn't, and I think she was kind of getting at drawing people out more. She found a way to draw them out, and so she found a tool that helped her figure out why she wasn't getting the class participation.
He remembered who had worked in different fields, and when something came up related, he would call on that person. Well, tell us what you know and what you think about this.
I had a professor last semester who seemed to make an effort to solicit varying viewpoints from the class. And I remember a case involving some Native Americans, and the horses had been taken away from them and sold to a glue factory or something. What's the big deal? Just pay them for the horses. And professor allowed the 2 Native American students in that class to explain to the class why the horses meant more to the Native Americans than just money.
She had actually given us a supplemental reading. It was like an anthology that included different perspectives.
And I think also when professors introduce the perspectives of other people, like I'm taking a kind of race theory class right now, and I think the experience for me has been wonderful because I'm reading people's writing that resonates with what I believe and what I've always felt. And I write out in the margins, yes, I agree, and it feels good to be able to do that.
Some of you have such great resumes. It's like so-and-so clerked on the Supreme Court or on the Fourth Circuit, but dag, I never hear you talk about it. I never hear you talk about what you thought about that judge who wrote that opinion in this case book. Those are the sort of things that might make it come a little bit more real for us.
I'm thinking about a professor who was not only willing to talk about cases he'd won or that had settled well for his client, but he would use cases that he had lost or had not settled well and help me stand on his shoulders. So of all the thousands of mistakes I shall make when I'm a lawyer, hopefully it won't be that one.
When a professor exhibits an air of humaneness toward his or her students, it just goes a long way in the student's heart, especially a first-year law student, toward feeling like the professor is in the classroom not only to teach the students the law, but to welcome them into the legal profession. And the professors that exhibited that air, by and large, motivated me to work the hardest in their classrooms.
If I know that this professor is a nice person and treats people well, I'm going to work extra hard in that class just because I have that kind of relationship with that person, not only in class but also outside of class.
And I went to talk to a professor, and I asked them a specific question about criminal law. But this professor, after I finished my question, I guess he read in my face, the torture I felt I was probably going through, and he just said, where are you from? How are you doing? And he talked to me for the first time instead of a student in a Socratic method sort of adversarial role, but as a person, as a man to man, person to person with compassion. And from that time on, I've tried to get every class this professor has taught. Not that I expect some sort of special treatment, but know this person can see me as more than a law student. He can see me as a person.
I remember going out on a limb, and the professor, her eyes just got bigger, and she just she knew I was afraid to give in my 2 cents of what I thought. And so she drew it out of me, basically. She helped me by just acknowledging me and showing me, like, through her eyes, that go ahead, you're okay, you can say whatever you have to say. And she pulled it out. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Tell me more. She basically said, I'm really impressed. And that just made me think, okay, maybe I do belong in this institution, and maybe my voice is an important voice that needs to be heard. When the professor asked in a very stern tone of voice, is there anyone in this class that can articulate this rule? And I thought, does he really doubt that? And I raised my hand, and I did, and then throughout the rest of the class he said, and the rule as articulated by Miss was. He did that 4 times, and I go, well, gee, I got that rule. And I felt so good, yeah.
A teacher is someone who always is also a learner and always trying to improve their craft.
And that's the most important message I could give, is if you want to hold that high esteem of being a teacher, professor, you're always seeking to improve yourself.
Be a real person. Be a nice person. Be humane. Be gentle. Let's inspire everybody to that loftier goal and to being advocates, and advocates who cherish their humanity. So just feel free to be yourself, to take chances, take risks, and to have fun, because I think that's when the learning begins.
Listen. That's all.